All right, so hi everybody. I am Kelly Pollock, and I am sadly alone tonight because Jamie texted me about half an hour ago to say that she has a fever and her husband was sending her to bed to rest. So unfortunately, Jamie is not with us, but we are going to carry on with these terrific women who are on with me today. So I will introduce them quickly, but they can tell you more about themselves. So Rebecca Fachner, did I say that right?
Fachner. It's okay. You were
Fachner.
close.
I even asked first. Rebecca Fachner is a tour guide and historian in Washington, D.C., and also a podcaster, and she can tell us all about that. And Maureen O'Prey, did I say that one right?
You did.
All right, all right. Is a historian of brewing in Baltimore, which is awesome. So we are going to talk about that. So welcome to both of you.
Thank you. It's nice to be here.
Thank you.
Yeah.
This is fun. I'm excited.
So luckily I prepped them that I was going to ask them what they're drinking. So Rebecca, what are you drinking?
I am drinking whiskey. I have Ardbeg with me. I've recently discovered that I like whiskey, that it actually works for me. So I've been kind of experimenting a little. So that's what I've got.
Excellent. Very nice. And Maureen, I assume beer, right? What are you drinking?
Yes, I am drinking beer, and tonight it happens to be a Checkerspot Fancy Pants, which is a delicious New England IPA. I just love the hop combination in this with the cashmere and the Idaho and the Citra. It's a beautiful, beautiful combination of hops. Just dances across the palate.
Excellent. And I am drinking something that looked really good in the grocery store, and I'm less sure about now that I have it at home. So it calls itself mead. It's not really mead, it's Camelot Mead, but it's honey wine. And I realize honey sounds sweet, and so I should have been prepared for that. But on the back, it says that it is subtle and sublime. It is actually just very sweet. So that's okay. I like sweet things. I love honey, so it's good. It's just slightly sweeter than I was anticipating. So cheers to everyone. Hope everyone is having a fabulous Thursday. I am taking the day off work tomorrow, so for me, it is my weekend, and I am very excited.
Nice.
So, I wanted to start by asking you each just a little bit about how you got into what you do. I don't think very many little kids think, I'm going to be a tour guide or I'm going to write about the history of brewing in Baltimore. So, I want to get a sense of, how you got to where you are. So, Rebecca, you want to start us off?
Sure. Hi, I'm a historian and tour guide, and I work in the nation's capital. And I got started with this. I have a background in history. I have a degree in history, and I struggled for a long time because a lot of, I think, history majors have to deal with the question from their relatives at Thanksgiving, like, oh, what are you going to do with a history degree? And I initially didn't do anything with it, and then discovered that I really wanted to. And I wanted to talk about history in a public way. And so I kind of stumbled into giving tours as a sort of side gig. And then it worked when I went back to school for my master's, and it like worked with my schedule. And so it became my full-time gig, and it's a lot of fun. I get to talk about all different kinds of history. I get to talk about to people from diverse audiences, and I really get to meet people where they are in terms of history, which is really what I wanted to do. Meet people sort of where their history is at and sort of grow their knowledge from there.
And what is it like walking tours, bus tours? What kind of tours are these?
I give all kinds of different tours. I work for a couple of different companies, one of which is a walking tour company, and we give tours all over the nation's capital, Arlington Cemetery, the National Mall. We give Scandals tours in Capitol Hill, and I give tours of museums. Sometimes I'm in a car and I, bring people. I don't do the driving, someone else does the driving. And we go around to different places. So it is primarily walking. That's probably about 95% of the kind of tours that I do.
I love it. So I'm going to have more questions about that. But first, Maureen, why don't you tell us a little bit about how you got to where you are?
So I also am a historian by training and by trade. And after I got my master's degree in historical studies, I went the teaching route. So I taught college history for 14 years, actually. It was wonderful because you get to open the eyes of so many different individuals. And teaching in college, it's not just, the fresh faces that are coming out of high school. It's also, I had Vietnam veterans that I was teaching. So it really was an honor to bring new history to folks that thought they had a lot of history in their background, but to be able to share something enlightening, a new experience for them, a new learning for them, or a new understanding with new sources, and really getting them to experience the, critical thinking and comparing, vetting sources, primary sources, secondary sources. That is really very exciting for me, but also to make it exciting for them was one of the most rewarding things that I had about teaching was opening everyone's eyes and making it enjoyable, not rote memorization of dates and, certain male figures or the victor writes the history. No, no, no. No. We're all making history every day. What's happening right now is relevant to the future, and someone will look back at what we're doing now and say, oh, that was historically very significant. And we forget that because we're living in the moment most often. So that's been very, very enjoyable. But as a historian, I had the experience of visiting family in Ireland. There is a lot of Irish in my background, as you may notice from the last name. And we were literally in Dublin, and we were at the same St. James Gate Brewery. And if you haven't been there, go. It's beautiful. And it's literally a museum. When you go, several stories before you get to the overlook, the spinning overlook where you get your Guinness stout at the end of the tour. It is, and Rebecca, I think you'll love this. It's just a testament to how public history can really work and how you can really bring history alive to people so they can touch it, they can sense it, they can feel it, and they get absorbed in it, and they really want, even people that don't like history or don't really care much for it will become engaged. It was just brilliant. And then I get home and I'm sitting on my back deck, literally drinking, I think it was a Heavy Seas Loose Cannon. And I had that moment where I'm sitting there, I love craft beer. And I realized that I knew more about the history of brewing in the homeland than I did in my own backyard. And as an historian, that was a little embarrassing. And I thought, oh gosh. And then I went down the rabbit hole. And I started with Baltimore, and I started with researching the history of Baltimore, and I expanded to the whole state of Maryland. But it was just getting my feet wet and going down the rabbit hole initially. It was such a rich, vibrant history that it became an obsession. And I never let go of it. And it was something that I really needed to connect other people to. And that in and of itself was one of the more rewarding things that has ever happened, is taking something that was very little known and exposing that history and laying it bare and having people say, wow, I want more information. This is very cool. I had no idea we lived in such a vibrant, rich place whose history was, so long in the making and so indicative of what is happening now. So, yeah.
I love that. So while we're talking about people's reactions to things and to history and to stories, one of the sort of downsides of podcasting is I can reach a lot of people at once, but I have no idea how they're reacting to it. Every once in a while somebody will like leave a comment and be like, oh, that was a cool episode or something. But you don't really know how people are reacting. So I have to think something like giving a tour is the total opposite. They're literally right in front of you. You are talking to them. So can you talk about that? Like, how do people react? Are different tour groups different? Do you feed off the energy of the people that you're talking to? What is that experience like?
Yes, you do feed off the energy of the group. That's different groups have a different energy. In my line of work, we do a lot of school tours. For some reason, like 8th grade seems to be the year that we've decided to send our children to Washington. And
That's
that
when
can
I went to DC, yeah.
right. Like everybody has a DC story from like 14 years old. And that can be a tricky age. They can be So some of them can be into it, but they don't want to seem like they're into it. And so that can be tricky. And it's a whole different kettle of fish when you're with adults who are like paying to be there, who want to be there, who want to learn more about this history. And so you definitely feed off the energy of the group. There's definitely, you learn to sense when you've got them and when you don't. Like when they're, you can see eyes start to glaze over. And the other thing that I have learned to do, this is over trial and error. I've been a tour guide in DC for a decade now, is I deliberately modulate my language, because I have a lot of foreign guests. I mean, not now with COVID anymore, but in the normal times, I try to enunciate as clearly as I can. And I try very hard to use, and this is difficult, but to use words that are not like, I don't use idioms. I try very hard not to use idioms on my tours, because that's the thing that sort of throws off foreign guests. And I don't want to do that. And the other thing, and this comes up a lot, people ask me about this all the time, is giving tours in the nation's capital, do you deal with politics? And it's inevitable in some ways, because this is the nation's capital and there is politics, but I try not to talk about, like, I don't take political positions. It's not fair. I don't want people to feel that they're not welcome on my tour in the nation's capital. If they say something I know to be untrue, that's something, but I don't, that's a sort of audience trick that you don't want to lose half your audience by saying something that's political. So there is a lot of audience reaction and sort of gauging their interests. And some people just want to hear what you have to say. And some people want to be skeptical, and it's kind of it's a learned skill.
Yeah. Do people ask a lot of questions, a lot of follow-up questions?
Sometimes they do, and sometimes they don't. And it seems to be they're all on the same tour. Like if people are asking questions, there are a bunch of people asking questions, which is really great, because that's how you learn. And if they don't ask questions, no one asks questions. So it's just very much like, and it's one of those things that I've had to kind of figure out, am I fostering an environment where people can ask questions, and am I giving them like the permission to do that? So I like when people ask me questions.
You need like one plant on every tour that'll ask the first question and get the ball rolling.
It's true.
So, Maureen, when you were talking about teaching, it was very much that same thing, that you had that sort of interaction with students. Do you do that sort of thing now? Do you do like public speaking and stuff? Or, I imagine when you write a book or when you work on a documentary, that's very different, because you don't have that immediate response from people.
Yeah, and it is a little tough because it's an audience of one. But I do, and prior to COVID, it was one of those things that I really enjoyed, was being able to go out, and whether it was doing a book signing or a historical collaboration that I was explaining, how we got here, the history of the brewery or the brewer, and how we recreated this recipe. So it's one of those things where I missed a lot when COVID happened, because it was just such a disconnect. And it's easy for, like anything, out of practice, out of mind kind of thing. So it's nice that we're kind of having this return to normal, and we can have these in-person things again. So I actually have a talk that I'm giving at Checkerspot on the 24th, right before Thanksgiving, about another historical collaboration. So it is one of those things, because you can get that engagement with the audience, and it is exciting because they do want to know more. And sometimes you think, oh, this is going to be boring, because not everybody wants to know about, the agricultural records and how I found the hops. And but they do. Shockingly, if I leave that off, they're like, wait a minute, how did you figure out the hops? And it's great, because that means it's not only that you're engaging them, but that they care and they want to know more. And that is such a rewarding thing, that people want to learn more, because sometimes you think they don't in this day and age. They're just happy with whatever's thrown at them. But to engage them and get them excited about something is a very wonderful thing, which I've missed. And I'm so glad we're kind of getting back to that now.
Yeah, definitely. So I want to talk some about women since we're a panel of women here. So, Rebecca, a lot of the history of the nation's capital, the sort of obvious history, is like presidents and vice presidents, and they're all men
Mhm.
until now, finally.
Yep.
But I know you care a lot about women's history. So what are the sorts of unexpected ways that you can work women into tour? What does that look like when you're thinking about the history of the nation's capital? Does it work neatly into including women's stories and women's voices? What does that look like?
It looks like a lot more, it's a little bit more work, but it's good work. There are always women to talk about. All but one president has been married at some point in their presidency or their lives. And so there's first ladies to talk about. And once you study enough first ladies, you know that the men that they are a crucial and integral part to
Yeah.
the success of helping the man they marry become who they become. And women's history is often in the sort of, I don't want to say shadows, but sort of pushed off to the side. But you can talk about, for example, one of the women that I talk about a lot that sort of runs through a lot of DC history is Alice Roosevelt Longworth, who's the daughter of President Theodore Roosevelt. She lives in DC for her entire long life. She dies at 96. And she doesn't run for office herself because women didn't in those days, but she's got enough political juice that she meets every president from Benjamin Harrison until literally Jimmy Carter. So, women's history lives in these stories that are previously sort of dismissed as like scandal stories or a side show to the main event, and it's really more about bringing that into the forefront and talking about how that's important to the overall picture here. What's happening in society is actually history, and women's history is American history. So it's about kind of making sure those stories and being intentional about telling those stories.
And how do tour groups react to those kind of stories? I imagine it depends, but
It depends on it depends on the group and the story.
yeah.
We have some of the tours that I give are like explicitly scandal tours, and those are more for adults because we talk about adult content. But even for school tours, I try very hard to emphasize women, and not just women, but people of color. And I talk about who had this land before, Europeans came to this continent, just because you can see students' eyes light up when you talk about somebody that is relevant to them, that they can grab onto, right? And so giving people a little taste of women's history is engaging them in their own story. So I feel like that's, and it depends on kind of how you weave it in and which story you talk about. But people want to hear something about their own history, something that they can grab onto.
And how about how they react to you as an authority because you are a woman? Do you ever get people sort of mansplaining? And I imagine you must sometimes.
All of the time. So I give tours of Arlington National Cemetery, and that's one of the hardest tours. I love it. It's a gorgeous place to give tours, and I love giving a tour there. But you have a lot of men who think that they know, who think that because military is coded masculine, that I clearly don't know what I'm talking about. And I have gotten feedback from people that say that I'm too serious, and then other people that say that I'm not serious enough. And so it's just, there's a lot of gender coding in the way that people react to me, particularly at that place. And so that's something that I've been very conscious of. My reaction to that is to make sure I know what I'm talking about inside and out, so that they can't, I don't give them anywhere to go. That's kind of my reaction to that. So that's kind of how I react to the mansplainers, but they're there and they're fun.
Yeah. Yeah. So, Brad, I'm going to come back to that question in a little bit. And to everyone who's in attendance tonight, please feel free to submit questions either in the chat or the Q&A. I could keep asking questions forever, but I would love to engage all of you as well. So please start putting questions in as you have them. So Maureen, I have a similar kind of question for you, which is, you think of beer and there's a lot of guys, a lot of dudes involved in beer. So, what is that like for you as a woman historian, and do you, as you are thinking about and looking at the stories of brewing in Baltimore, in Maryland, are you finding stories with women? Are you finding an audience that's like, wow, this is incredible? What does that look like?
Yeah, it's not dissimilar to what Rebecca was talking about. There's definitely, over the course of the years, there's definitely been the mansplaining days that, oh, little lady, you couldn't possibly know what you're talking about when it comes to beer history, really? Yeah, so there's been that. But when you have the depth and breadth of knowledge to back up what you're saying, suddenly that mitigates, and there's less. There's always a challenge, and that's fine. I welcome it, please. And I'm always a person to say, if I don't know something, I'll always say, I don't know, but give me time to find that out, because I will. And beyond that, as far as women in the industry, well, there's one simple thing that I always start with, and that is that we were the original brewers. So when you look at brewing, it was part of our household duties. That's what we did. When you think of colonial America, women were the brewers. We actually constructed homes in the colonial era to brew beer. It was part of what we did. The kitchens were made specifically for that purpose. And that was our responsibility. That was our role prior to industrialization. So it was our purview, and it is our purview again. It always has been. And a delight that I have is being able to historically go back and talk about the women that were brewing. Yes, predominantly it became a man's industry from the Revolutionary War until almost today. But we still have those beautiful shining examples. Margaret Geek Butts in Hagerstown, a German immigrant, came here as a teenager by herself, God bless her, traveled from Germany and married a husband in Frederick. He died pretty much after the first son was born, moved to Hagerstown, and she opened her own brewery. She married another gentleman, but opened her own brewery. And she had one of the most famous, best Weiss beer breweries in Western Maryland for 28 years. And she was a mom of 2 children, and she was the brewer. She ran the brewery. I mean, these kinds of stories are incredible, but it's not just one. There are so many, and it's such a privilege and an honor to be able to share these stories. And in some cases, recreate the recipes of some of these iconic female brewers. So it is one of those things where, yes, I get to focus on that.
Yeah.
And the history is obviously bigger than just one gender or one brewer, but it is an integral part, and it is such a journey that we have been on for so many centuries. And where we are today, it's a beautiful place because women are in the industry. Checkerspot, women owned, right? So there's so many women owned breweries, or at least, partially women owned, and so many female brewers. And I'm so excited to tell those stories. It's the best adrenaline rush you will ever get.
And how do people react to those stories as you're telling them?
They get really excited because so many folks had no idea. They had no idea. Oh, women brewed? That was their thing. They had no idea. They always thought it was the man's zone. And when you see, even during the industrial era, so many women owning breweries, or as the brewers, and with their husbands in some cases, or not, like Margaret Geek Butts, and it's just, or Mama Ernestine Beck in Baltimore. She had this brilliant, another Weiss beer brewer for literally 20 years. It's and so successful. It's amazing, and people have no idea, and they get really excited and they want to know more. Tell me more. How good was the beer? All of those things, and then it just it's like a cascading effect, a domino effect, where once you start opening the door with one thing, and then they want more, and the door opens and the floodgates open, and there's so much more information, and then all of a sudden it's like, whoa, here we go. Here's all the stories that we have to tell, and there's so many more that I haven't even gotten to.
So, Rebecca, we mentioned at the top that you also podcast. Could you talk a little bit about your podcast and how that started and what you guys do?
So my podcast is called Tour Guide Tell All, and it started out as a pandemic project, like so many other things did in the last couple of years. So tourism hit the pandemic hit tourism pretty hard. We suddenly looked like our calendar, someone had just wiped everything off of it, and a bunch of us sat around and we're like, well, we've been talking about, guests will come up to us and say, hey, you guys should have a podcast. And so we thought, well, we got all this time, and so we started out. A couple of us doing this podcast. We talk about history, we talk about scandals, we talk about political history, and it's mostly, right now, it's entirely women. There's two of us, me and my colleague Becca Grawl are the hosts, and then our colleague Camden is the sort of behind the scenes. She does all the tech stuff that I can't figure out. And so it's entirely women produced right now. And it's really a lot of fun. We get to talk about all the stuff that we want to talk about on tour, but don't have quite enough time to go into in a lot of depth. And we found ourselves learning about new things and kind of going down little rabbit holes that are a lot of fun.
Do you have a favorite scandal in history to tell us about?
Well, let's see. There is I can tell you the most underratedly scandalous president of the United States was definitely Warren Harding.
Really?
Yes. Yeah, Warren Harding. So first of all, his wife was really awesome. Speaking of first ladies, his wife's name is Florence, and she literally meets the man who becomes her husband and says, hey, I'm going to make that man president of the United States. And then she does. And so she's really writes his speeches for him and does his organizing and does all the background stuff that makes him into a president. And their agreement with their marriage seems to be they didn't have a love match, and he could meet his needs in another way. And he does a lot all the time. And he has affairs with literally everybody, and while he's in the White House, and there's all of this, he meets women in the apartments of friends, and there's all manner of things. And one of his mistresses is going to save all of his love letters that he writes her over the course of their decades-long affair, and they were published right after I became a tour guide. They were entrusted to the Library of Congress for a long time and then published, and they're just 50 Shades has nothing on Warren G. That's all I'm going to say about that. He's fantastic.
I guess it was a different time before the 24-hour news cycle and paparazzi.
And it's such a great example. We think we've cornered the market on scandals, and that people in the past were very boring. And I am here to tell you, not at all true. I have at least 4 scandals tours that we give. And I mentioned maybe one person who's still alive. We don't like to talk about people who are still alive. And you'd think there wouldn't be enough scandals, but there really is. There's a lot of scandals.
Maureen, are there any scandals in Baltimore brewing history?
Oh, yes, indeed. There's an international incident, actually, with one of the brewers that came from Germany. August Beck had come over and worked in his brother's brewery for a little while in Baltimore, and then opened his own. Unfortunately, his wife, his longtime wife, passed away after he started to meet with success. I mean, he had this incredible mansion that he built on the brewery grounds for himself and his wife and his 2 sons, and had the latest technology. They took full advantage of the Industrial Revolution and steam power, and he remarried after his wife passed, within about a year after his wife passed. But he made her sign a prenuptial agreement that she could not get anything but $4,000, and she could live on the grounds of the brewery until she remarried. Well, unfortunately, he passes away shortly after he marries the new bride. And she remarries probably about 4 months later and moves out of the property. She gets her $4,000. And then as the brewery is going through some troubles because he had extended himself too far to pay for all these industrial revolution technologies, that the malt grinder and all of these other things that he had bought. And as his sons are in court trying to fight off bankruptcy, she shows up and she's got a little baby in her arms who little baby. She claims it's their little brother from, the marriage. And wait a minute, she was living in the house with them the whole time. She would have had to be full term by the time she left the house, yet no one knew she was pregnant. It was very curious. So she sues not on behalf of herself because she had signed the prenuptial agreement, but on behalf of her son for the estate. So everything goes a little bit crazy. And then they get witnesses to come in and testify against her that there's no way that that child could actually be August Beck's son. It's interesting testimony, needless to say, because unless you're actually technically with them in the suite, how much do you know? And were examinations conducted, kind of thing? How far along were you sure she wasn't pregnant? All of those sorts of things. But it raised a lot of questions, and it made her nervous. So she fled with the baby to Germany. So it became an international incident. To kind of solve the case, we actually had to have our president reach out to Wilhelm I of Germany and have him conduct the investigation in Germany to find out if she in fact had the legitimate child of August Beck or not. So there's a lot of scandal wherever you look, whether even in the brewing industry, which is what you would think is a little more quiet, a little more peaceful. Oh no.
I love it. So we have a question from one of our audience members for Rebecca. So Brad wants to know, how do you handle guests who want to argue, or do you have like a worst guest story that you're allowed to tell with us?
Oh my gosh. Hi, Brad. How do I handle guests? So sometimes guests want to argue in good faith, and that's great. And they want to learn, and I'm on board like 100%. Sometimes guests want to argue in bad faith, and that's pretty easy to figure out. And it depends on the setting, but if they're engaging me in a group of a bunch of people, I try to shut that down and move along, because it's very clear that they're not engaging with me in a real way. And you will occasionally get people that want to ask like gotcha questions. I had one person, we do a tour about Lincoln and his assassination, and I had a guy come up to me after the tour and say, I don't know why I took this tour. Everything you told me I could have read in Bill O'Reilly's book. And like, for any historian, that's like waving a red flag in front of a bull. Like, I literally just melted down. And all that I could think to say to him was, well, there's a reason that Ford's Theater doesn't actually sell Bill O'Reilly's book. Like, they actually do not sell it because it's not historically accurate. So, I haven't read it, so I can't like go point by point, because I would never spend my money, frankly. But there have been, I had a guest very early on in my tour guiding career that said to me literally that, oh, the little lady knows her history. And I was much younger and probably a little more innocent then, and I didn't know what to say. I just kind of stood there like gobsmacked. But yeah, you can get some interesting people. Basically, if they're arguing in good faith, I will talk to them. If they're not, I try to shut that down and walk away, because that's not, you're my tour to like try to embarrass me. Like, you don't know me. That's not nice.
Yeah. I'm gonna have to remember this if and when am ever out in the world again.
Yeah.
Going on tours to to be like the one who's asking the nice questions to get the ball rolling.
Right, right.
Shut down the argument that the not good faith people are making. We need to be allies to tour guides, people.
Yes, yes. Tour guides are your friends.
Yeah. So, Maureen, my mother, Terry, asks about the beer that you're drinking, wants to know how hoppy it is and whether it's available in Ohio.
I'm not sure that it's available in Ohio, but I do know that there is a kind of a conglomeration, a group that often will exchange beers. So if folks are visiting in Baltimore, they'll bring beers back to, Ohio or other places. Actually, I have friends right now that are headed to Kansas, and I know that I'm getting some great Midwestern beer coming back. When they do get back. So that is a bonus. I would check the Facebook groups that do this. It's an excellent place to kind of touch base and see what you can get. Little horse trading, you trade one for the other, but it's such a great thing because there's so many craft beer lovers. And as far as the hoppiness, to get back to that, because it's a New England IPA, it's got more of those kind of tropical notes. And the beauty of the Fancy Pants, which kind of sounds funny now that I say it that way, beauty of Fancy Pants is that literally with the cashmere, it really is smooth across the palate. So it takes the hop bitterness. You can still get some of that, and you get it in the citrus notes and the tropical, the citrus end of the tropical, but the cashmere really smooths it out across the back of the palate. So it marries beautifully with the malts, and it's not, overstated bitterness. It really is this kind of lovely, smooth, tropical notes that are going across your palate, but the cashmere really smooths it out and takes away a lot of those extra notes of bitterness that you get in the back.
What's your favorite kind of beer?
Ooh, so that's really hard for me to answer. So today I'm in the mood for a New England IPA. So today that would be my answer. There are other days where I just really want a really well-crafted Pilsner. Some days I'm into smoked beers, and that's, certain times of year I really enjoy a smoked beer. And in summers when the heat is on, I really want a beautifully crafted kettle sour.
Oh yeah.
So it really is kind of a seasonal, but also, if I'm pairing it with food, then it's going to be a food thing. So it's seasonal, it's food, it's mood. But today I'll go with New England IPA.
I had no idea. It makes sense. I had no idea people were like driving beers across the country to each other. It reminds me a little bit of Smokey and the Bandit.
Yes. Exactly.
We've discovered this in doing this show that so much of this stuff is so regional. And so, Jamie and I the other day were like emailing back and forth, like, can you get this where you are? I don't know if I can get this where I am, we're going to have a Canadian vintner on in a couple months, and I don't think either of us is going to be able to get wine from Canada. But it's so interesting how, some of it's regional, but some of it is the liquor laws in different places just make it really hard to ship to certain places. So yeah,
that has definitely been a big issue here in Maryland for, since repeal. It's getting better now, but it's an issue, and there's nothing uniform throughout the nation, which makes it even more difficult. So, and in Maryland specifically, it's actually not just what's nationwide, but in each jurisdiction, the rules are a little bit different. So just going from county to county is problematic here.
Yes. So Brad has a question for both of you now. So I should have just, when Jamie couldn't come on, I should have just made Brad the co-host. Yeah. Sorry about that, Brad. We'll keep you in mind next time. So he wants to know if there's something in the course of your work that just like legitimately blew you away. Like you learned it, it was so surprising to you that you had to just go run and tell somebody immediately, kind of thing.
Maureen, do you want to take that first or?
Um, sure. So for me, I think it was twofold. It wasn't just the role of women, but specifically when we're talking about Maryland brewers pre-prohibition, um, their willingness to accept on an equal basis people of color. We've got brewers in Maryland and actually use their homes to help those on the Underground Railroad, and they would hide them in their lagering cellars in their homes to help them get to safety. But also we've got so many stories of brewers that hired free Blacks before the Civil War. And if there was, for example, an injury that happened to them on the job in the brewery, they would pay for the doctor to come treat them. And then if they were not well enough to work again, they would pay them a stipend so that their family wouldn't go hungry. These kinds of things, these incredibly human things that we should think of and we should all engage in and we should all do, they're there. And they've been happening. And we either didn't know the stories, overlooked them, or just assumed it didn't happen. But for me, it was such a welcome, beautiful, wonderful thing to uncover all these stories of people being truly wonderful humans. I mean, we knew it was there. At least I felt it was there, but to actually uncover that, excavate that, and be able to share it with people, that was one of those moments where I'm like, screaming it from the hilltops, hey people, they are as magnificently wonderful as I thought they were. Let's go.
Yes. Yay.
Yeah. Oh, that's wonderful. How about
I
you,
feel
Rebecca?
like this is the best part of my job. I feel that I read a lot, like more than is necessary or even healthy. And I always am finding something that I'm going to weave into a tour. And for example, I was reading about there was a submarine during the Second World War, and they were deep under the water and they couldn't surface because they were in enemy territory. And one of the crew members got appendicitis. And so they didn't have a surgeon, they didn't have a doctor. All they had on board was a pharmacist assistant, which is, I'm sure they're very lovely people, but they are not, as it turns out, surgeons. And so the skipper was like, look, you're the only guy here with any medical training. And he's like, I don't actually have medical training. And he's like, this guy's going to die. So do what you got to do. The guy, the pharmacist assistant, is buried at Arlington National Cemetery. So I get to talk about him on my tours. And I talk about Frances Perkins all the time. She was the first woman in presidential cabinet. She witnessed the worst industrial disaster in New York City history, the Triangle Shirtwaist Factory fire. I tell everybody that because it's going to spark her activism and leads her to create the Social Security Act. And there's just so many little stories like that I read and then get to like weave into a tour somehow. So it's really, that's one of the best parts of my job, is finding these little bits of information and getting to talk to people about that.
Yeah. Oh, those are so fun. So I am not a historian, and I'm always very clear to point out, not a historian, just a question asker. But I, of course, have another podcast that is about history. It's called Unsung History. And the whole reason that I started it actually was because of a story that I heard that I was like, I have to go tell everybody. And then I had to like go find an audience to go tell. And that is the first episode of the podcast. It's about the knitting brigades of World War I. And so this is all the people who are at home during World War I, at home, actually in Europe too, but specifically I was talking about the US, who are just knitting all the time. Like the women are like walking into movie theaters and knitting. Like anytime you're like outside without your needles out, people are like, why aren't you knitting for the soldiers right now? And it was just, I'm a knitter. And so for me, that was just such an amazing story that I was like, okay, I got to go find people to tell about this. So I love those kinds of things that you find out about and then just need to share with the world.
Yes. So great.
So I want to ask both of you, what sorts of advice you have for people who are maybe interested in the kind of career you have, or it sounds like you both love your jobs, but sometimes the advice could be like run away. But how people could think about getting into these kinds of careers, or what you maybe wish you knew before you had started down this road. So any advice that you might have.
The first piece I would advise I would have to anybody who wants to become a tour guide is shoes are the most important investment that you can make. Literally, like your feet are your best friends, which is not really, I suppose, what you were asking about, but
it's good advice though.
Shoes are so important. Your knees, when you get up into your 30s and 40s, your knees will thank you. As far as people going to my job, I have a great job. I love my job. I be curious and ask a lot of questions and read a lot and talk to people. And this is what is so great, I think, for me about Twitter. Being in part of the Twitter historians community has just been so wonderful, because there's so many historians that like they have one thing and that's their jam and they dig it in a big way. And my brain just doesn't work that way. Like I have commitment issues with history. Like I want to read about all the things. And then like it kind of spews out my mouth on my tours. And I love being on Twitter and seeing all of these amazing people doing all this interesting work. And it has helped my job. Sort of, I draw from that to give my tours. So curiosity would be the biggest thing, like an endless fascination for how, and forgiveness, like people are weird, and not just the people in the past, but people in front of you. Like people are weird and they ask interesting, odd, kind of silly questions sometimes, but it's all really great, and just kind of embrace it.
Do a lot of people who work as tour guides have history backgrounds? What are there other things that people come in with the background in?
Some of them have backgrounds in hospitality, and most of the tour guides that I work pretty closely with have some kind of a background in history. It's not always American history. One of the tour guides I work real closely with has her master's is in ancient Greek and Roman history. So, but I mean, that helps with architecture, I would imagine. I know a tour guide who's an architect, and so it's not always history. Part of it is you need to have an ability to talk to the public, like you have to be, there's an approachable aspect. There's an ability to project your voice and just kind of have like a stage presence. So some people come from the world of like lawyers, and there are some people who are actors in the tour guide industry. In DC, my experience has been they tend to have a background in history because there's just so much history here.
Yeah. Yeah, that makes sense. It's funny that I hadn't thought about that. One of my sons is pretty dramatic, and we're often telling him like, you're going to be a lawyer or an actor. Like it never occurred to me that tour guide, but that would probably be perfect. How about you, Maureen? Do you have advice for people who are interested in your line of work?
I would say two things. Be passionate. If you're not passionate about it, you won't go very far. It's such an investment in time, energy, and I think Rebecca said repeatedly, I read more than I need to, or I read more than I should. I second that emotion. It is one of those things. It can become obsessive, and that's a good thing. It's a good obsession. So make sure it's something you're extremely passionate about, but also open the mind. So many people have an idea already of what they think is a certain aspect of history or something that's happened. Well, hang on there. Read the documents, read the accounts, look at the archaeological evidence, marry the two, vet the information, because you may be surprised at what you find. It may not be quite what you think or what you believed was, whatever it was. And that's, let the evidence take you where it needs to go and be open to that. Those are the two most important things. And have fun. Have fun, because if you're not having fun, then you're in the wrong field.
Yep. I
100%.
think one of my favorite things about history as I've been getting a little more deeply into it is that the people you sort of think of as you think of sort of superficially a view of history, who you think might be like the good guys in the story or the bad guys in the story, like it's always so much more complicated than that. And digging into what people's motivations were, and it's easy to sort of look back and be like, okay, well that person was right and that person was wrong, but it's never that obvious, and it's, well, sometimes it is.
That's one of the
It's not always that obvious.
that's one of the things I tell people all the time, like, is the motto of my professional life. Like, history is complicated, actually. No one is all good or all bad,
Yeah.
ever. And no people are the same that they've always been, and holding people up as perfect or terrible. Maybe perfect is not a thing that we are. We're all weird, and I try to talk about this with like our founding fathers, like they were jerks too. Like, they're not perfect. They were great guys. They were smart men, but they also like kind of, some of them had egos, and some of them owned people. And so they're not perfect, and holding them up as perfect negates the great things that they did, because perfect people could do perfect things.
Yeah.
Indeed.
Yeah. This story that I did this past week on Unsung History was about Gaylord Nelson, who's the founder of Earth Day. So, it seems like the good guy in the story, right? But he's trying to do this land grab of Ojibwe land reservation that's treaty protected in Wisconsin in like 1965. Like, we're not talking 1865. And, looking at the story and sort of just being, it blows my mind sometimes to think about these things and like these people that I sort of thought of as, good guys or whatever. So yeah, so fascinating. So we are running low on time here. I don't want to keep people all evening, although I could regularly keep asking questions all evening. But we like to wrap up with asking all of our guests for a recommendation of some sort. And so this could be a book you recommend, or a movie, or a beer, or I don't know, last week or the week before, Jamie recommended a scented candle. So it could be anything.
Okay.
So I will let you open your mind to something that you might want to recommend. And if anyone in the audience wants to recommend anything, feel free to do so as well as they're thinking.
I'm eager for Maureen's beer recommendations.
Oh boy. Wow, I have to think about that for a second. Well, obviously I'm recommending Fancy Pants. But I would say this, give yourself the latitude to try something new, because you will be surprised. Walk into a brewery or a winery or a distillery. Perfect example. I have never been a bourbon fan, and I tried Tobacco Barn Distillery. They're out of Southern Maryland, and it's brilliant. I am now a bourbon fan. I never liked bourbon before, but now that I've had Tobacco Barn, and it's veteran owned, they do some pretty incredible things, and they make some, excuse my French, damn good bourbon. So yeah, I'll recommend that.
I love that. I would recommend, oh my goodness. I'm trying to, there's so many different things I have bouncing around in my head that I want to recommend. I would recommend, other than a good pair of shoes, I would recommend basically going to your local library and reading a lot of stuff. Like, that's my favorite thing. Just kind of scrolling through the catalog and finding something that grabs you and going with it. And whether that's history or romance or science or whatever it is, like, just giving your like curiosity a day to just fall down a rabbit hole and be. And that's where I'm at.
I love it. So I'm going to recommend, as anyone who has seen more than one of these knows, I love mystery novels and mystery shows, and this is kind of my thing. So I have a very specific genre of mystery novel that I like to read. I like to read series of novels that are set sometime in the Victorian or Edwardian or like between the wars kind of time periods. It doesn't have to be in London, often is, could be in the US too. always a woman who's the main character. She's often like a widow or like a penniless lady or something. So this is like a very specific genre that I read. And so I just sort of crowdsourced the other day and I was like, have I read everything in this genre already? Is there more out there? And Anya Jabor, who's a history professor who's been on Unsung History, recommended the Emily, and I don't know if it's Cabot or Cabot Mysteries. It's by Frances McNamara. It's a series of books. And I discovered that, and I've started to read, and it's wonderful, but I discovered that the first book is actually a book that I'd been intending to write. So I'm going to instead recommend that you read it because I clearly have not written it yet. So the first book in the series is called Death at the Fair, and it's about the 1893 World's Fair, the Columbian Exposition, which was in Chicago, in the neighborhood that I live in. So I regularly walk by, buildings and trails and things that were part of the 1893 World's Fair. So it is excellent, and it's this like world that I imagine and think about regularly. And my husband and I were actually going to write a mystery novel with a woman main character set at the 1893 World's Fair. So now we don't have to because somebody else wrote it. So you should go read this mystery series. I believe the first few books in the series are all set in Chicago. And I, of course, am a huge, huge fan of Chicago. So that's my recommendation today.
I love that. We did a whole pod about the 1893 World's Fair.
It's one of my favorite topics in
So
in the whole world. We have a map of the World's Fair hanging up in our living room. It's yes, we take our sons, especially since the pandemic started. We'll go out like hiking. There's only so much hiking you can do in Chicago, but there's like this meadow that's where the manufacturing and liberal arts building was, and so we'll sort of point out, oh, I bet it started right here and ended here. So we love the World's Fair.
I love it.
Despite all the problems that exist in the fair and the history of the fair. So Rebecca and Maureen, thank you so much. This was a really fun discussion. I'm so sorry that Jamie had to miss it. We will not be doing a show next week. Next week is Thanksgiving, and you will all be eating and drinking with other people. So we're not doing a show. And I think there's not the one after that. But then the next week, the next second Thursday in December, is our next episode. So make sure you join the email list so you keep up to date on when our episodes are. And we will do a drawing later of somebody who was on this episode to win the prize. So watch your emails and you'll see if you won. And I guess that's all we have. So thank you.
Thank you. This has been fun.
Thanks, everyone. I'm going to stop recording. Hold on. How do I do that? Hi, people watching who are hearing me saying, how do I stop recording?